Wherever you are, morning, noon or night, I do thank you for joining me here. So quite a stacked sort of lineup of topics that I wanted to get to. There's quite a bit going on in the heavyweight division. It may be a little bit quiet in the sort of past week and this week too. Not necessarily going to be some of the big time cards, but that's certainly coming up. But in this live stream, a number of things that I've got on my list that I wanted to talk to you about. Obviously, Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, a third fight. What's happening? This seems to be, a little bit of confusion around this, and there seems to be parties on both sides of the coin, or the same side of the coin, not really sort of speaking from, the same sort of direction. They're a little bit all over the show, and this is Shelly Finkel, Frank Warren, and Bob Arum, all slightly saying different things, which doesn't necessarily give me confidence that things are, happening as they should potentially be. I mean, remembering they've been talking about a December 19th fight for Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder for quite some time. But obviously this is seemingly starting to fall by the wayside by the look of it, or perhaps some of this publicity is just a way to sort of get this over the line because they've been talking about this for some time. But I do want to go through that. Also on my list, a whole bunch of other things. You have Arslanbek Makhmudov putting on a really good performance, of the fastest knockouts of the year. It really was something a little bit strange because I think we all expected he was going to win, but maybe not quite so quickly. But that's one of the topics on my list. Joyce, Daniel Dubois, they are going to be November the 28th. That's all locked in. Not going to be on pay-per-view, which is great for the fans. Want to get your perspective on that as well. So finally now I am seeing some, there's always a bit of a lag between the time I start talking and then the time comments show up. But the comments are starting to come in now, so that is good. And then when I listen in on the archive, it was always there. It just sort of takes a while to sort of kick in. 15 in the building, or 21 in the building at this point. So welcome one and all. You've got MMA champ Liam Roskell, Jake Munro, Scott 70, Unger, Force Ghost Fabio, Billy is in the house. So thank you one and all for joining. Good morning, I guess, if you're in the UK, and it's probably early morning if you're in the sort of Northern America sort of part of the world. Clicked over one setting, it ended up doing a bit of lag, so hopefully that issue doesn't sort of repeat itself. UK Rob Boxing says, new athletic article at Boxing Squared. So I haven't had a look at that, so actually what we'll do right now, because I've got a couple of notes that I wanted to go through. Okay. The Athletic. So I do have a subscription here. Okay, if we get to home, where's the boxing tab? Just having a look now. Not sure. Just let me know what I'm meant to be looking for in terms of the headline. So what I will do in the meantime is actually just get through what I wanted to start off by saying. So you had the reports of Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder that third fight would not be going ahead. Then you had Shelly Finkel immediately disputing the reports, and I quote, this is the one to Sky Sports, "They are wrong. We will fight in December." Then Frank Warren on the show that he just had over this past weekend, muddying the waters again, saying, well, the contract doesn't go on forever. Tyson fights this year by hook or by crook. And that also, when he was asked if he would be fighting Wilder this year, he said not unless someone comes up with a truckload of money with guarantees. Then you have Bob Arum talking to TalkSport, saying on December 19, when we really hope to stage the fight with Fury and Wilder, we were informed by both ESPN, which handles Fury, and Fox, which handles Wilder, that December 19 isn't available because there are 5 college football championships that day, which are massive, and 2 NFL games. December 19 can't occur. There are no other available dates where a Wilder vs Fury fight can happen in December. That leaves Tyson Fury. If he wants to do a fight in December, then he'll have to do it with another opponent in the UK. And then hopefully, if he's successful and Joshua is successful on December 12, we will look forward to talking about the Fury vs Joshua fight sometime in the spring of next year. So all of that. So Finkel, Warren, and Arum not on the same page at all. But I, had a few thoughts about this because I was like, well, hang on. They're basically saying, well, we can't get that date. So Fury will probably still fight and then we'll move on to the Joshua fight. And I was like, well, hang on. Well, Deontay Wilder has triggered the clause, for the third fight. It's not his team that's promoting that event. It's Top Rank, Bob Arum. They're the ones with promotional control. So isn't it sort of beholden to them to organise the event, stage the event? But seemingly now it looks like they want to sort of cut Deontay Wilder out of the picture, even though, they're the ones that actually have promotional control. Remembering they're the ones that have pushed it back, throughout the year, sort of saying, well, we can't stage it. No fans. We want to have fans. We want the gate. We want to make as much money as possible. Dragging this thing out. And yeah, so I was like, well, how does that all work? Because surely if he's triggered the contract and his team doesn't have promotional control, and if you try to sort of walk away from that, wouldn't there be some sort of legal case that Finkel, Wilder and co. could actually launch against Bob Arum and Top Rank, something like that? It just, given Tyson Fury is under contract to fight Deontay Wilder, it makes me wonder what is happening next. And these are some of the things that aren't really being talked about. And Arum sort of skirted completely over the top with his quotes, just saying, look, Tyson Fury might fight this year, might be in the UK, and then potentially Joshua next. And it's like, well, what's going on with the existing situation? Very threadbare on the information. And you had Frank Warren sort of also talking at cross purposes to Bob Arum, because he's not saying that the fight's not going to happen, but it has to happen with a lot of monies. There has to be guaranteed money, all that sort of thing. Which again, given Top Rank has promotional control, is that a message from Warren to Top Rank? Look, lock this in immediately. And he says that the contract doesn't go on forever, etc., etc. But on the other side, you have Wilder and Finkel who've been sitting waiting for whatever to happen. And it hasn't been. So the whole thing is just completely, who knows really what's happening. So I know UK Boxing Rob, who just said something about a new Athletic article. I haven't seen it, had a quick scan for it then. But regardless of whatever they are saying there, the whole thing seems to be, very confusing at the moment. I mean, that's one way to put it. Maybe it's not abandoned, but maybe it's not as close to happening, at least in 2020. I mean, Arum is saying December is not really on the table. But, less than sort of a day before that, Shelley Finkel was saying, yep, it's happening in December. So they're certainly not on the same page, not, with the same information. And you have to wonder, really, what is going on here? Because the whole situation's a bit strange. But I would have thought that given Top Rank has promotional control, the onus is on them to set the event. So I know some people have sort of said Deontay Wilder doesn't want it, or he's injured and all that sort of stuff, but they have accepted the fight. They have triggered the contract clause. So isn't it over to Bob and co. to do whatever he has to do, so to get the event done? And it just seems a bit weird to me that you would basically say Fury will fight someone else and potentially move on. So yeah, I just found the whole thing a bit odd. So what do you make of that? So drop your comments in. There's quite a few comments that are sort of passing by at the moment, so I can't go back up to the top, but we will be getting to some other topics on my list. So if you've just joined, wherever you are, morning, noon or night, thank you for joining me here. I've just been having a look at some notes and all that sort of stuff, so I have seen the chat sort of blast by. So if you want me to sort of jump in here with a comment, please do so now. So we've got Marcus saying, what happens if Breedis unifies? Okay, I'm not going to answer that. MMA Champ says, I don't care about Wilder versus Fury, AJ versus... Okay, that comment is cut off. I think there's a lot of people with some trepidation about, do we need the third fight? But, contracts are contracts. For me, it's sort of hard to sort of see how they could get out of that fight unless they're trying to run down the clock. But isn't it actually, Bob Arum with control? So they're the ones running down the contract, whatever's left on it. They're the onus is on them to sort of finish it off. I don't know. So Udosa says, Fury finished Wilder. He can't take any more beatings. MMA Champ says, Fury undisputed. UK Rob Boxing says, check DMs. Okay, I will just do that now. Just bear with me for a second. So Rob Weatherall, aka UK Boxing Rob, says, the Gypsy King is coming home. See you all in December. So that is Tyson Fury. So he's saying that. So this is from 2 minutes ago. Okay, so I don't know what's actually happening there, but Mike Coppinger with his tweet saying Tyson Fury tells The Athletic he's foregoing Deontay Wilder trilogy after scheduled December date was pulled. Deadline to rescheduled expired Friday. Now looking for hometown bout December 5 per sources before mega fight with Anthony Joshua. Okay, that's quite interesting. But I would have thought, given the onus was on Top Rank to be arranging the event, that surely they have to actually, they're the ones that have to pull the trigger on organising the event. The other side is just waiting for the time, the date, and all the sort of other associated details. So on the face of it, with this tweet, and Tyson Fury saying, thanks, Mike Coppinger, the Gypsy King is coming home, see you all in December. I still think there might be some water to come under the bridge here. And before people say Tyson Fury doesn't have a license to box in the UK, he can get one. He can apply for one. I have seen there's a number of people saying he can't fight in the UK anymore. I'm sure he can. He just has to, do some paperwork and all that sort of stuff. So we shall see, because he's all squared away with UCAD as far as we know, based on, the stuff that happened a couple of years ago. But he has been fighting in the United States more recently. But getting back to the chat window here. So IB Freely says, going away now, but wanted to give you props for a great channel, consistently high quality. Thank you for that, IB Freely. I appreciate it. TCFBRP says, I think it would be best for Fury if he moved on to fight Joshua, but I would love to see Wilder get his ass kicked one more time. Levi says, White still has the end of the year to redeem himself. I think White will stop Povetkin and he'll eye up a fight with Fury. Liam says, DeBella confirmed that Hemi will be on the Parker Farr undercard. So he had, there was actually a date confirmed for Hemi Ahil. That was on my list. There was a date announced for him for Sky City, a fight November the 13th. So if he is going to be fighting on December the 11th on the Parker Farr undercard, I guess that November the 13th date for Hemi Ahil at least shakes as a good sort of opportunity to blow off a little bit of ring rust. So MMA Champ says, to be honest, I heard that the contract expired or was close to being expired. Yeah, I mean, there has been some talk of that, but at the same time, the people who are, in control of the promotion is the Fury side, is Top Rank and ESPN. So, I mean, it's a little bit harder to sort of say that the other side is the one stringing this out. I don't know. Maybe some deadlines have passed. Maybe there is some sort of loophole they'll slip out of it. I don't know. So Right Hook Boxing says, Ellen said they were originally looking at Wok, Molina, and even Tommy Morrison's son. I think they'll actually picked the harder fight. So is this Dave Allen? So he is facing Christian Hammer. We can talk about that a little bit later. Silver, the reviewer, says, Boxing Squared, stylistically wise, do you think AJ style would give Fury more problems than Wilder's style? Not necessarily. I think Fury would, because Deontay Wilder can be unpredictable. He's probably got a little bit more sort of explosiveness when he's coming forward, at least, and he sort of whips across the ring. I mean, Joshua is a bit more methodical in his sort of approach. But, yeah, I mean, if this fight gets made, I mean, I think that's one of these things we've been hoping for forever and a day. These big fights sort of seem to be, for the most part in the past couple of years, eluding us. Tent Ringer says, must be hard to host a Fury fight in Manchester with a lockdown looming. Yeah, I guess that's the other thing as well. If there is going to be no crowd, what sort of fight would he be having in the UK? But also, is there just some sort of, is it a scheduling thing and we're going to see Tyson Fury fight Deontay Wilder in the new year? I mean, it's hard for me to think that they can just get out of the contract. I mean, they're the ones with promotional control. It just, I mean, it's hard to say. Wayne Towers says, Boxing Squared, good morning, evening, mate. Really looking forward to Parker versus Farr, Dubois versus Joyce, Usyk versus Chisora. I'm going Parker wins by UD, Dubois wins by KO, and Usyk wins by late TKO. Yeah, not bad picks there at all. Udosa, Frank Warren said Fury will be fighting in December. Yeah, Frank Warren did say that. Or he was saying he's going to be fighting this year. Against who? That's the other thing. Because his quotes, he said Wilder, he'd only be fighting Wilder if someone comes in and guarantees a truckload of money. Which, I mean, why has it taken so long for this to be arranged? They've been talking about it for months and months and months. We've been hearing from Bob Arum that they could take it anywhere in the world, yet they seem to be wedded to having it in Las Vegas. And now that there's seemingly either no crowds or reduced crowds, they can't get it over the line. I don't know, it seems to have just drifted. And does the blame for that sit at Top Rank's feet? Because they could have taken it somewhere else. I was just at a rugby test match yesterday here in New Zealand, in Wellington, where there was 31,000 people. So big events, big crowds are happening all around the world, in different parts of the world. Maybe not all around the world, but different parts. So, yeah, I'll just have a little bit of water here, just a second. So Isaac Jameson says, who do you think hits harder, Daniel Dubois or Arslanbek Makhmudov? That's a good question. I think we can both say that they do hit hard. I think Arslanbek Makhmudov has faced the more durable opponents than Dubois. He's had quite a few cream puffs, but yeah, I mean, I think both guys need better opponents at a certain level for us to get a better gauge on that, but they both hit hard. Will Stokes says, you know what I reckon about Arslanbek Makhmudov? He's one of the top heavyweight prospects around right now. I think Yoka has to be the number one right now, though. So my top 6, and this has been for a couple of years now, has been Daniel Dubois, Tony Yoka, Filip Hrgovic, Arslanbek Makhmudov. You also have Joyce and F.A. Ajagba. And certainly more recently, maybe F.A. Ajagba, his sort of star has shone a little less bright than it had earlier in his career. But I still have optimism that he is still a good fighter, and he's going to be in some decent fights. Maybe he won't go as far as some people thought, but he's still a good heavyweight prospect. Forsco's Fabio says, AJ got knocked out by a Taco Bell Employee of the Month. Lee, the bald guy, says, good morning, Mr. Squared, here from here in Watford. Hope you're well, Lee. Tent Ringer says, has Makhmudov always had that twitch? Yeah, he has. It's one of those things I don't even really notice anymore, but then I'll see people leaving comments on videos where there is footage, like say the documentary that I did earlier this year. I mean, I just don't see it anymore. It's one of these things that I've seen it so much, it just sort of is like one of his things that just glazes by me now. MMA Champ says, AJ has more belts. Udosa says, isn't it good to see Fury fighting back again in the UK? Well, I guess, is that going to happen? That's the big question, because can they just walk away from the Wilder fight? It is a big question. And if he does fight in the UK, who's it going to be? Because if there's no crowd, but also if they're looking towards potentially, if they can somehow get out of the Wilder third fight, they're looking towards a potential unification of some sort with Joshua in 2021. It would be of a certain level. And I did see on Instagram that Lucas Brown, he put his hand up and said, yep, I would love to fight Tyson Fury if you do fight in the UK. Liam says they might struggle to get an opponent for Hemi. I can't see it being a decent opponent. But also, generally for the Joseph Parker undercards, Duco does, similar to David Koskata, they're pretty sort of thin in terms of the budget that's spent. You don't really have too many big names or sometimes not even really great fights on the undercard, and they'll fill them out with what they call corporate fights as well, which is just some people basically who are having a go. Adam Fahey says, what's good? Hello to you, Adam. Billy says, feed Lucas Brown to Hemi. Why not? Well, I think Lucas Brown is looking for much bigger and better coin, so he's only going to allow himself to be fed for the right price. Right Hook Boxing says, glad you didn't slurp the water, mate. That would have been an unsub right there. E-Man says, Boxing Squared, have you brought tickets to Parker vs. Farr? What did they cost you? No, I haven't bought tickets to Parker vs. Farr. I live in the sort of the other halfway across the country from that, and because of COVID and all that sort of stuff, a weekend away, which for those tickets, all that sort of stuff, the accommodation would cost an absolute packet. I'm still trying to dig myself out of a COVID hole, so I will be covering it from home for the princely sum of $40 on pay-per-view, which I've already got. Silver, the reviewer, says, Boxing Squared, if Usyk went to become on the undisputed at heavyweight, would he be rivaling Evander Holyfield legacy? Yeah, probably. I mean, if he can go on and, get some notable wins and unify some titles at heavyweight, that's pretty good. E-Man tickets start at $69. Yeah, there's not too many of them. I think most of those have gone. I did have a look at the ticket map. Actually, it was UK Boxing Rob who sort of directed me to the sort of ticket map. There were some very expensive tickets. Sort of reminded me a little bit of the title fight between Parker and Andy Ruiz back in 2016. They ended up having to slash some of the prices quite late because they were overpriced. And there were certain sections I thought, yeah, they're going to struggle to sell those. And because I think it was the equivalent of about $400, and they weren't even floor seats. Unger says corporate table 10k. That's a decent chunk of change. So Anthony Willis says, didn't Wilder just have bicep surgery? Not just. He had bicep surgery back in late February or March. So there was a interview that he did with the PBC podcast in April. And he said that he'd be sparring by the end of May. So unless he's re-injured himself at some point this year, which is a possibility, apparently he should be good to go because his injury has been dealt to. He's had the rehab. He was getting back into sparring. And he's probably had a pretty decent break. And apparently he's been down in Miami. So, from what we know, Deontay Wilder injury isn't an issue at this point, but who knows? He is a guy that says he's always in shape, always ready to go. He's prepared so he doesn't have to get ready, yada, 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 all that sort of stuff. Will says, gun to the head, who do you see winning Dubois versus Joyce and how squared? I've got to go with Joyce, late stoppage or points. At this point, I'm leaning towards Daniel Dubois, possibly by stoppage, but I've sort of been all over the map on that fight. And there was a little bit of sparring footage of Tom Little and Joe Joyce, and I saw it, and Little was sort of, clowning him, and I thought, well, imagine if Daniel Dubois was able to sort of exploit those openings that were clearly there, and we know Joyce is hittable. What's going to happen to Joyce? So it just made me sort of, I still think it's a very good fight, and if Joyce can actually be somewhat defensively responsible, can maybe utilize a bit of movement, drag Daniel Dubois into the later rounds. We're really going to see Dubois put under some pressure, but if it is a case he can manage to tag Joe Joyce early and often, what could be an early night. Count Drago says Tony Yoka and Hrgovic both looked impressive in their recent wins. Well, you can't take too much from Hrgovic knocking out the world number 646. I'm a big fan of Hrgovic, but, it is realistically, that's, it was a complete knockover job. It really was. Cream puff central. That guy shouldn't have been in the ring with Hrgovic. It was bad matchmaking. Really, it was to add a bit of name value to the card that Team Sauerland had put on. Blow out a little bit of ring rust for Hrgovic, nothing more. So when there was some stuff around Hrgovic, knockout of the year, and it's like, well, if this was Hrgovic versus the world number 60 or something, yeah, maybe it would sort of lend itself to sort of having some, credence and credibility. But when you're blowing over someone who probably shouldn't be in there with you, I can't really sort of get on board with that. Tony Yoka, he did look impressive against Johan Dorper. And actually, we've just had Arslanbek Makhmudov over the weekend. Somewhat of a strange fight because it was all over in seconds, and it was all over before it really even began. Arslanbek Makhmudov had taken one or two breaths, thrown two punches, and it was over. Dylan Carman eats a hook and goes down quite heavily. And the referee, looked at him, and it sort of looked like maybe Carman didn't want to continue. Obviously tasted that power, and it had floored him, and it was all over. 6 seconds. And I paid for that, for the 3-month subscription so I could access that pay-per-view event. So 38 New Zealand dollars or whatever it was. So $6 and something per second of that fight. Yeah, so I'm hoping that they do sort of turn that around quite quickly and have another card. Eman says, Unger already got 2 seats pretty close, 400 each. That's a massive chunk of change. Udosa says, what date is Parker vs. Farr? It's a good fight and good to see Parker back in action. So that's December the 11th. So that will be, actually I'll just check, because I think it might have been a Friday New Zealand time, which would mean it would be a Friday Thursday evening in the US, Friday morning in the UK. I'll just double check that. Yes, so the 11th. So it's probably going to be a little bit of a strange timing for the international audience. John says, morning Boxing Squared, a bit early for you. This UK time it is anyway. What's 8:43 p.m, so not early for me at all. Silver, the reviewer, says, Boxing Squared, there's an article that claims Wilder said he never trained. Your take on that? I can't say I haven't seen that article, but what I would say is he hasn't been in a training camp. So, I mean, the fight hasn't been announced. So, I mean, has that been taken a different way? I don't know. But on the face of it, they're all saying different things. Finkel, Warren, and Arum talking across each other, not lining up on all of this sort of stuff. And then there's talk from Arum that there could be a UK fight for Fury. And then maybe on to the next one, which begs the question, well, what happens with Wilder? Does that just go away? I mean, because if Top Rank is putting that on, surely it's up to them to sort of make the date and, fulfill the contract obligations. Maybe there's a loophole. I don't know. It just sort of seems like we're missing a lot of information. And the fact that Finkel was still saying it's happening for December, and then Arum is saying, well, we can't get a date in December, they're clearly not talking to each other. So Edwin Peter Higginson says Parker has never been stopped. So when's he taken far out by KO? He should be in line for another world title bout. See, this is one of, I think, the misconceptions that somehow Joseph Parker is going to be, if he beats Farr, all of a sudden, and it's a narrative that the New Zealand media has been spinning. I think without sort of really taking in the contextual elements of what's happening in the division, especially the WBO. Because Parker's not in number 2 spot at the moment. And if Daniel Dubois, who has a fight scheduled before Joseph Parker, if he beats Joyce, he'll retain number 2 spot no matter who, no matter if Joseph Parker beats Junior Farr. So I think there's a lot of, and David Higgins and Eddie Hearn and, some of what they've been saying in public, they're sort of dancing on the head of a pin in the way that they're sort of talking about it. They'll say that they, could potentially go into a, they're not saying definitively, but it's being misinterpreted, especially by the New Zealand media, which doesn't cover boxing very well at all. They basically take everything hook, line, and sinker without any sort of, sort of taking on, anything else that may be happening. It's just sort of all sort of spoon-fed and just printed. But I think, obviously the winner of this, they'll consolidate their ranking, but I don't think they're in line for a title shot anytime soon. Because what's got to happen is if Alexander Usyk, if he gets his title shot, well, he'll have his title shot. But if the belt is dropped and Daniel Dubois beats Joyce, it'll be between Usyk and Daniel Dubois. I don't think Parker or Farr, whoever wins, has got any shot of getting a title shot next. Unless Daniel Dubois loses and, say, for example, Joseph Parker ends up having a thing with Usyk if something happened there. But if everyone keeps winning in the way it is, it's not probably not going to fall Parker's way or Farr's way. I don't know. That's just how I see it. Frank Warren has got in with the WBO, so if his man keeps winning, they're just going to end up locking him up for a shot. Or if Usyk ends up fighting Joshua, which seemingly, I don't know, it seems like that may not happen. But if he does, then maybe there'll be a final eliminator, which would be between Dubois and Parker if they kept winning, respectively. Okay, so Zaki says, good morning from Algeria. Hello to you. Hope it's all good over in Algeria. Alex says, probably late to the party here, but have you talked about Fury and Mike C confirming the Wilder fight is now off? Well, we did just, sort of, some of that happened just while I was on air, actually. Mike Coppinger saying in a tweet, exclusive, Tyson Fury tells The Athletic he's foregoing Deontay Wilder trilogy after scheduling December date was pulled. Deadline to reschedule expired Friday. Now looking for homecoming bout December 5 per sources before mega bout with Anthony Joshua. And Fury retweeting that saying, thanks Mike Coppinger, the Gypsy King is coming home. See you all in December. And then adding MTK Global, Frank Warren and Top Rank Boxing. So, yeah, I would take that at this point, don't take that to the bank. Tyson Fury says a lot of things. We don't know what's happening here, what it's all the contractual issues, because as far as Finkel was concerned just a day ago, that they're fighting, and they were going to be fighting soon, potentially in December, as he said. And obviously Arum has sort of said there's no December dates. Warren was saying, look, the contract doesn't go forever. They need to guarantee money for this fight to go ahead. There's a lot going on behind the scenes that we're not privy to right now. And some of this from Tyson Fury could be flushing out, something to be happening in the United States to get whatever's going on behind the scenes to make sure that sort of gets squared away. This could be some sort of tactic to try make sure that the Wilder fight gets over the line. I mean, who's to say that they don't all of a sudden in a week after some furious negotiations, someone's guaranteeing something and all of a sudden there's a fight in January. It could happen. So, yeah, and as we know, Tyson Fury, not often the most reliable, so just because he said it, I wouldn't necessarily take it to the bank, especially where we know that there's a contract involved, and Finkel's talked about, well, there's a contract to honour. Yeah, so I mean, we'll have to see, and if it does happen, and somehow they manage to get rid of the third fight, well, what does Fury do in December? Because I'd imagine it wouldn't be a terribly tough opponent, especially if they think that an Anthony Joshua fight was going to be the next fight after that. But yeah, I mean, if the path is somehow magically cleared of this third fight, I think a lot of fans will go, okay, well, we didn't necessarily want to see the third fight, but what's the fight that Tyson Fury would be in after that? But also it begs a lot of questions about, well, what's happened to Deontay Wilder? What's happened to the contract? How did all this sort of go sideways and south and whatever? Yeah, there's lots of unanswered questions. We don't have a lot of answers right now, just a lot of conjecture and speculation. So E- says, hello Boxing Squared. Do you think White needs to stop talking about fighting AJ and Fury and focus on Povetkin? White is so unlikable. Well, he should be stopping talking about Joshua and Fury. I mean, before the first fight, he was sort of talking past Alexander Povetkin, and he fought well in that fight, but then ultimately it counted for nothing. He got taken out. So Tim says, I'm not even 100% Triple D takes the Usyk fight. Could be a terrible matchup for him. So then it could be Usyk versus number 3. Well, everything seems to be so changeable at the moment. It's hard to sort of say. And with the clogged sort of top end of the division. And, I mean, I would rather see if Fury is not going to be facing Deontay Wilder, I'd like to see it, a meaningful fight, but I don't think that's what we would get next. Maybe it would be another sort of opponent on the Otto Warling level or something like that. I don't know. I know Lucas Brown has sort of stuck his hand up for a fight with Tyson Fury, but no one wants to see that, let's be honest. So Billy says, we don't have any boxing specialists in the New Zealand mainstream media. They're all rugby and cricket writers. But wait, in the sort of couple of weeks before the fight, you'll see the tagline change, and you'll see a couple of them, and this has happened a number of times. All of a sudden, they'll have the tagline boxing reporter. Edwin says, I also see Dan Dubois beating Joyce quite easily. Joyce is too slow and ungainly around the ring. Will says, haven't seen much of Farr at all, but I assume you have. Do you rate him? Where would he rank within the other heavyweight prospects around right now? I've seen quite a bit of Junior Farr, and based on the sort of style matchup, and I think just there is at the moment at least a perceived gulf in sort of class in terms of the experience of both fighters, the levels that they fought at. And some of the recent fights that Junior Farr has had haven't necessarily inspired me with too much confidence that he could go 12 rounds here and beat Joseph Parker. And I'll be doing a bigger sort of preview video on this closer to the time, but broadly speaking, I could actually see the first few rounds Junior Farr, who is the taller guy, the bigger reach, trying to keep it long, having some success, trying to box at range. And remembering Joseph Parker, won't be able to outbox, similar to, Anthony Joshua in some respects, that fighting a bigger guy, trying to fight them from the outside for the most part. He's not going to have as much success, so he's got to try find his way to the inside. So I could see Farr having some success early on, but then I think as the fight starts to wear on, I think Parker will start to pick up more rounds. I think he'll start to outwork Junior Fa, but there is something to be said that there is a period in a fight which we've typically seen maybe between rounds 6 and 8, 6 and 9. There's almost like some sort of energy saver mode that Joseph Parker goes on, and he just conserves himself. So if he falls into that, maybe some of those rounds could be quite close, but I could see him over rounds starting to break down Junior Fa, and I do think he will get a decision or potentially even a late stoppage. And one punch that I think will be key for Joseph Parker in this fight, a punch that Junior Fa is susceptible to, is the left hook. Devin Vargas caught Junior Fa with several clean left hooks. We also had Dominic Gwynn dropping Junior Fa with the left hook. So it is a punch, just like Anthony Joshua is vulnerable to, the left hook. He has been caught with it a number of times at a lower level. He's been dropped by Dominic Gwynn by it, rocked a couple of times by Devin Vargas. So Joseph Parker, if he can sort of find that left hook, I think, he could be in business. But yeah, I do think, I know some people have said it's a mismatch and that it's not going to be interesting at all, but I think this will go some rounds. I'm sort of thinking that, Junior Fa will be competitive, especially in those early rounds. He will use his height and his reach quite well. He can move. He's got a few, good tricks that he can sort of utilize. But I think, he will start to tire a bit. And at that point, I think Parker will start to have a bit more success, and if he can get to the inside and work a bit. But then also bearing in mind that Joseph Parker isn't a great inside fighter. I know a lot of people like to harp on about, well, the opportunity was denied against Anthony Joshua, but a lot of fights Joseph Parker gets to the inside, doesn't do a lot. He just sort of falls in. So, but I do think that as Junior Fa sort of starts to tire a bit, he won't fight as tall. Sometimes he has been prone to sort of fighting a bit small. And if that happens, and probably will happen at points in that fight, I think Joseph Parker is going to, his speed difference will be, key for him too, with the hand speed. I think he is going to, that jab's going to be a key weapon. I think he will sort of work to the body a little bit too, but I do think he'll catch him with a couple of decent shots at times. But if it goes the distance, I think it's like an 8-4, 9-3 type of fight, with maybe Parker pulling away in the sort of second half of it. Or potentially starts breaking him down and maybe taking him out later in the fight. So that's my sort of high level sort of look at that. But I think especially early on, it will look competitive. I mean, Junior Fa's had a look at him before from the amateurs, but it was a long time ago. But I do think that's a fight that, Junior Fa, will be in early on. But I think maybe the golf and class and experience and the level that they fought at will become maybe a bit more apparent as the fight goes on. But I don't think it'll be an embarrassment or anything like that. I think, there will be moments of success for Junior Fa that maybe people will not see coming. Bill Billy says Kevin Barry versus Eugene Berryman should be fun at the next presser. Eugene does not like Kevin. Well, I don't know too much about their backstory, but Berryman is obviously a very good coach. Coaches Israel Adesanya, so working out of that city kickboxing gym. So Junior Fa is going to get good sparring. Hemi Ahio obviously is in the same gym, and there's a lot of fighters, MMA fighters too, so Fa is going to get really good sparring for it. Anthony Willis says Parker versus Fa, that was supposed to be in my comment above. Anthony Willis says it's a bloody good fight. I'm in suspense over this one. I think it's being marketed as the fight of the century in New Zealand, all this sort of stuff. But, that's PR sort of puff. I think it's a good fight, but I do think Joseph Parker, probably his experience and class will I think he's just, the speed difference will probably play a big part in it, as I sort of mentioned before. UK Rob Boxing says he'll take Fury versus Caballero in December. Fellow stablemate. I guess the question would be, why couldn't it be Fury Wilder in the UK in December? That seemingly could still happen, right? Why not try, make the most of the UK audience for what would probably be one of the bigger fights you could make in the division right now? And given it is still under contract, apparently, who knows? Right Hook Boxing says Fury versus Caballero, Rivas, Takam, Hunter, I believe. The WBC stick to their rules. Yeah, but if they give Fury a voluntary, as it were, if he's not bound to fight Deontay Wilder, or if there's some sort of agreement from not to at this point, he's probably going to pick someone that's going to be a safe pick. But, do we need to see Carlos Takam given another shot? I wouldn't have thought so. I want to see some fresh blood getting some title shots. I really do. Bill says, I remember Eugene throwing shade at him, implying he robbed David Tua. Probably right too. Yeah, was that at the comments in 2018 for one of the Flores presses? I think I remember something about that. Axel Schultz, yeah, Caballel is okay. Eddie promoting Chisora now as gatekeeper to title shot, and Caballel schooled him years ago. Still amazes me Derek Chisora's on pay-per-view and, you know, all that sort of stuff, given some of the losses he's taken over the years. But I mean, that's a good example that if you're an entertaining fighter and, you know, you're in entertaining fights, that you can still get good fights and make good money. That's more of that sort of MMA mentality, as opposed to, you know, the boxing idiom, which seems to be, you know, if you have a loss, or one loss, it seems to be that you disappear into the dust for 2 or 3 years. So Unga says, right hook boxing, watch someone rocket into the WBC top 15 from nowhere. And actually, the WBC has probably got one of the strongest top 15s out of all the sanctioning bodies. It doesn't look nearly as nonsensical as the WBA's in particular, and the WBO's is littered with regional title holders. And, you know, say for example Tom Schwartz, I mean, he's in there. He hasn't done anything. Before the Tyson Fury fight, he hadn't done anything. He's done nothing since, but still, I think he's, number 8 or something ridiculous. He's still quite highly rated. Zaki says, who wins Valin versus Dubois? I would be leaning towards Daniel Dubois. Will Stock says, very interesting, thanks Unger and BS. Okay, I'll get to my next sort of topic. So 97 in the building, so if you can smash that like button on the way in or the way out, it would be appreciated. So Liam says there's only 25 thumbs up. Come on, we can do better than that. Yeah, if you could, that would be much appreciated. But so I'll get on to my next topic. So yeah, something that sort of passed by, and I actually did sort of cover this a week or so ago on my Patreon. Andy Ruiz Jr. He's not going to be in the ring this year, which was a disappointing sort of thing to read, actually. Or should I say, he said it on a social media, and then I saw the report and then went and found the video. The reason they can't get that over the line and have that this year, I would be thinking some of that could be some of the dates aren't there. Perhaps it's, you know, money too, remembering if there's no crowd and Andy Ruiz Jr. is demanding a premium to fight. Maybe they just have to try to sort of push some of these guys back, because remember, it's a whole bunch of heavyweights from the PBC stable that haven't officially been announced in fights yet. So, I mean, those guys generally get than some of the lower weight guys. So it's a bit more an expensive endeavor to try and get some of them in fights. But yeah, I'd like to see the likes of Charles Martin back, you know, Adam Kovnatsky, Gerald Washington, Andy Ruiz Jr. We haven't seen a lot of him, a lot of these guys, none of them for this year. So, or one or two of them earlier in the year. But yeah, so Forced Ghost Fabio with the super chat there says, it takes a lot of skill to miss with a 6-punch combo. Tom Schwartz earned his number 8 ranking. Great stream, BS. Well, I'm still waiting to happen to sort of see what his promoters are doing with him, because allegedly he sort of struck a woman. That is allegedly. So there was some sort of investigation going to be happening, and until then his promoters, EC Boxing, were just... not EC Boxing. Oh, it's just escaped me. But they were not going to be. God, it's gonna annoy me now. Oh, it'll come to me. Anyway, so they were going to do some sort of investigation, and there was some other stuff happening behind the scenes. But yeah, whatever. So Yusuf says, where is Fury Wilder 3? Good question. Very good question. Pound for pound boxing, big up Boxing Squared, always a listener of your videos. Thank you very much for supporting the channel. Wherever you are, morning, noon or night, welcome along here to this live stream. Thank you for joining us. So 92 in the building at the moment. If you can smash that like button, it would be much appreciated. And I do appreciate the ongoing support by, and I have noticed over this whole sort of, this year's been really weird for boxing in general, but I think the heavyweight division suffered quite a bit too. And just because there's been so few fights, some weekends there's only been 1 or 2, you know, what I'd maybe call, you know, halfway decent fights. Like the Gorman and Larty one. There was some interest there, but it was, you'd normally hope that there would be a bigger fight to sort of, each weekend rather than that sort of level. And there's no disrespect to Gorman and Larty, but you know what I mean. So we're getting a lot of weekends like that where you have, maybe a prospect in with an overmatched opponent, or there's some, middle of the road type fight. So hopefully we can get a few more big fights, because I certainly noticed that with, fewer fights, I think just in general, I've noticed across the sort of boxing sphere. And I don't know if this is just, because of the pandemic, or there's less content, or maybe it's less interesting in terms of the stuff that's being broadcast by promoters and all that sort of stuff and networks. Feels like, to me at least, that just boxing is, casuals are on a little bit of a hiatus to some extent. Are you getting sort of that inkling that a lot of the places that you're going, it's, generally a lot of the same sort of people that you're seeing, to regard as, hardcore boxing fans weighing in on comments, and, you're seeing less obvious casual type comments and all that sort of stuff. And it's no disrespect to anyone who follows the sport casually, but you can often spot the comments and that sort of stuff. That's I'm just seeing less of just interest in boxing in general, sort of in all sort of forms. But are you seeing a bit of that, noticing that? It's just one of these things. I was like, did boxing miss a trick? Because, there was the whole thing where, post-COVID, people were saying, well, we can't afford to have mismatches, we need to have 50-50s, and we haven't really had a lot of that, And I think there was an opportunity to, early on, when people were coming out of lockdowns, that boxing could have, really sort of put a stake in the ground, got some casuals interested, and I think it just kind of got wasted because promoters not wanting to sort of put their own money on the line because they, could make a loss. I think they just made, fights that made sense for the money that was available, especially from TV networks. So Count Drago says, any word on Michael Hunter's next move? No, not really. I mean, he seems to be hinting a few things on social media every now and then, but it hasn't really sort of panned out to anything. Sort of, rankings that he's got, the sort of prestige a fight with him now brings, and the money that he would command, it's probably going to be harder to get an opportunity that he wants than otherwise would have been the case a couple of years ago when he was sort of a little bit off the radar. Yusuf says, keep up the great content. We love your work, man. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Ryan says, boxing is being forgotten about. It's bleeding fans not picking them up. Yeah, I definitely think it's bleeding fans, at least the casual fans, maybe some hardcore boxing fans too. I think there's probably a number of people who've been following the sport for years that have been maybe following a bit more MMA more recently, because generally the matchups are more even. And there tends to be pretty much good fights most weekends. Can't always guarantee that in boxing, unfortunately. Right Hook Boxing, he's also got her channel. Do follow him. Do give him a subscribe if you can. So he says yes. Billy says, Right Hook Boxing, fair enough, but he could at least step up to janitor level. Okay, I've missed some sort of part of a conversation there. Oh, I think it's in relation to Christopher Lovejoy. I'm just looking up further here. I want someone to knock over Christopher Lovejoy. That guy called out every top fighter while only fighting plumbers in Tijuana. Well, I think it was actually cab drivers and street sweepers rather than plumbers. But yeah, I mean, he's got to back it up. Since he sort of became a bit more well-known in 2018 after he first got ranked, he slowed down the progress of fighting. He's only had a couple of fights since then, against no one of note. And there's been a lot of chat. He's built his name quite well on social media, but nothing's really panned out for him. I mean, he says, and it's easy for him to say this, everyone's ducking me and all this sort of stuff, but he's got to get in there with, there seems to be at the moment all these cab drivers and street sweepers, but you got to take a step against someone we know. So, and that could lead itself to something else. But I think he really does want, as he puts it, the money fight. Udosa says, even I've been watching some UFC as boxing's been left behind. Tim says, Justice Huni vs. Whainga Opilu is a fun fight this Thursday. Huni looks decent and fighting for the Oz title. First fight, it's a nice touch. Is it this Thursday or was it next week? Was it the 22nd? I can't remember. I did have a quick check earlier. I thought it was October the 22nd, which would be 10 days away. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong there. Adrian says, hope you're well, mate. Big supporter from Ireland. Who do you have for Chisora versus Usyk? Just watched Usyk's performance versus Witherspoon. Do you think Usyk got enough credit for making him quit? It was always a bit of a lost cause, that fight, because Witherspoon called in at 2 days' notice. There was no real upside for Usyk. It ended up being, I think a lot of people have, sort of tagged him as a, bit of, I've seen a lot of it, people saying that he's a hype job and he got touched up by Witherspoon, etc., etc. But I do think that Alexander Usyk, firing on all cylinders, should beat Derek Chisora. The movement we've seen from Chisora before, he just doesn't really deal with it well. I actually saw a clip and it was quite interesting. It was one that David Hay on the Haymaker Instagram account, he posted it of Chisora and Carlos Takam saying, and the clip was them sort of boxing up close, inside action, brawling. And David Hay saying Derek Chisora is going to drag Alexander Usyk into a dogfight. And I just thought, that's just not going to happen. I mean, Alexander Usyk is the one that's going to be, dictating. It's more a question, what if Chisora manages to catch up with him? And, it's more, can he sort of throw something and land something at, different points of the fight to hurt Usyk? But, indestructible. But I think based on the skill set, the movement, just what he brings to it, he should outbox Alexander Usyk and, beat him comfortably. Particularly been inactive for the best part of 2 years, save for that one fight against Chaz Witherspoon. He's had injuries. He's now at a higher weight. Has he lost a step? Remembering he's in his 30s now, his style relies heavily on his athleticism. There's some interesting questions still there for me. So Udosis says Fury already knocked out Lovejoy in sparring after he's been all mouth. I do remember that, and Christopher Lovejoy was talking all sorts of nonsense after that. Low Budget says he's a plumber. So I think what Right Hook Boxing was saying was that plumbers are very tough there, especially the Mexican variety. So I've just got the cat. It must have emerged from a chair nearby me here down in the end office, and it's just lapping by my leg. So I'm just going to let it out because it's asking me. Just a sec. Okay, so Operation Let Cat Out the Door is a success. UK Rob Boxing, when they announced Spence vs Garcia moved to December, the writing was on the wall for Fury Wilder. Low Budget, probably been an easy day at the office compared to digging a drain all day. Tim says, no, you're right, it is the 22nd. I somehow got a week ahead of myself. Well, I had to check that as well because for some reason in my mind I thought it was the 17th for Justice Huni. So I literally only about half an hour ago I just went to his Facebook page because that seems to be the best place if you want to get updates for him. And it was, I was like, okay, it is the 22nd. So I'm not sure who's broadcasting that, but hopefully I'm be able to watch that one live. Udosa says, Chisora with 9 losses is washed at this age. Usyk to school Chisora UD. Billy says, those comments from Tyson regarding Usyk were odd, saying he has no name, can't speak English, etc. But then there was another article just recently where he said he rates him as the number 3 behind him and Wilder. So, I mean, this is where Tyson Fury, depending on the day, can say different things. Unga says, at Right Hook Boxing, UK Rob Boxing, you got any intel on Johnny Fisher? Any good? Right Hook Boxing saying, afraid not, pal. So what's the cat's name? The cat's name is Bowie, and that's because it's got one green eye and one blue eye. So in terms of Johnny Fisher, there's been a bit of hype from Sam Jones about him. The Romford Bull was coming, etc., etc. But, I haven't seen him fight. We haven't seen what he can do. He's obviously just signed on with Matchroom, so they're hoping to maybe make a bit of a splash with him. He's been sparring recently with Hughie Fury, also with Cash Ali, so there was just a couple of photos from the other week that I've sort of actually just got round to just this evening to sort of put into my file, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, interesting to see how he goes in those early fights. But he did have a post up a day or so ago. Seems like they must have got some sort of word about a date that he'll be appearing on a card at some point, potentially this year, saying that he'll be appearing on Sky Sports or something like that. So yeah, we'll see. Getting back to my list though, Makhmudov and Carmen. Sort of covered that. Andy Ruiz now fighting in 2021. We briefly covered that. What do you make of that? I mean, it's another lost year for Andy Ruiz Jr. No fight in 2020. And there will be some guys like that. But, Ruiz has had some wasted years in his career where he hasn't fought at all or fought sparingly. So, yeah, I mean, some of the best years of his prime have sort of gone by the wayside. And he is over 30 now, so it could be one of these sorts of situations that his window is closing, and maybe he won't even realise it until it's past. I don't know. Joyce, Daniel Dubois, not being on pay-per-view, I was pretty happy with that. I think most people were. And Frank Warren did mention that on the broadcast from the show over the weekend, saying that everyone realised that they had to get it made, and that everyone involved, the fighters, even took a bit of a haircut. So, whatever that means, and whoever's sort of sacrificed here, I guess we can really do is thank them, because we're going to get that card, which I think a lot of us have been looking forward to. Some other cards that have been announced in the past week or two, I have done videos on them, but weigh in on them if you'd like to. Zhang Jilei is going to be fighting Devin Vargas. That is November 7th. Same card, Filip Hrgovic versus Rydell Booker. Makhmudov, he'll be fighting later this month on October the 25th. Murat Gassiev returns October the 31st versus Kevin Johnson. Hemi Ahio is fighting November the 13th, opponent TBC. And a couple of results. So obviously we had Nathan Gorman versus Richard Lartey over the weekend. Not a great fight. Also, Peter Gederu versus Roman Gorst. Peter Gederu wins the German title. But I guess circling back to Gorman versus Lartey, I was expecting a bit more. I guess Richard Lartey go to war in the same sort of way that he did against Daniel Dubois. But Gorman, there was a lot of holding. He seemed to sort of spoil a bit. Richard Lartey seemed to be able to, throw a right hand from the outside. The odd jab. Not really too much more. So Gorman was able to handle him, sort of handily enough. But it was another fight where Nathan Gorman gets a win. It's a decision, but it's sort of similar to the Kevin Johnson fight, the Razvan Kajanu fight. He wins enough rounds, without looking spectacular, relatively wide decision on the cards. But I just don't really know where he's going. Does he have enough to get above British level? Because I don't know if he's proven that he is above British level. I mean, maybe fringe European, or is he Commonwealth level? I mean, there's not too much of a gap between those. But yeah, I mean, I just don't know where Gorman is really going. But then they were sort of saying, during the broadcast, that he'd lost 35 kilos heading into this fight, which is over 70 pounds. And he ended up 272. And some of it just completely struck me as, well, why was he fighting? If he wasn't ready, why was he put on the card? Was it just because he had to? That Warren needed to, put a body in a somewhat interesting fight. But imagine if this had been a few weeks ago, because remembering that fight was actually delayed. So Gorman and Lartey was meant to happen, 3 or 4 weeks ago? So I hate to think what he could have been, because he was 272 pounds for this fight. What would he have weighed if he hadn't have had that extra time? But some of it came off a little bit as excuses regarding the weight and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, at some point, he's got to take his training and, his career as serious as he can to try and maximize what potential and time that he does have in the sport. I mean, David Hayes spoke about in the broadcast. He says, look, that's just not good enough. You have to be in better condition. Because I think when we saw the weigh-in, a lot of us were like, well, that's a massive red flag. I mean, does this, let Lartey in here? Ultimately, Lartey didn't really have enough to sort of trouble him. I mean, that became apparent during the fight. I think beforehand, based on the sort of few rounds before we'd seen, we're like, well, if Lartey can start throwing bombs and just have it all over him, maybe he'll have some moments of success and spring an upset here. But Yeah, I don't know. Richard Lartey, he disappointed as well. He was basically a stone heavier than his past fight with Daniel Dubois, so perhaps that sort of contributed to a slightly more lackadaisical pace, because it sort of took on a rhythm where he'd sort of fighting us, and then sort of the rest of the round didn't really do too much. And it suited Gorman down to the ground with the pace, but I wasn't impressed with Nathan Gorman, and I don't really know where he's going either. What do you make of that? Let me know. So I'll get back to the chat here. So Toby says, salute Boxing Squared and the chat. So we've got 82 in the building, so smash that like button if you can. That would be much appreciated. So Bill Billy says, do you rate David light? I think he's a light heavy. He's an okay ranking and is undefeated. I think he's a good sort of Oceania sort of level fighter, but I'm not sure how much further he goes than that. I think, he can be in some good, fights at a certain regional sort of level, but maybe not too much further. I wouldn't see him sort of operating at world level, but, maybe May says Usyk behind Wilder, the disrespect. No, actually, Fury had himself, then Wilder, then Usyk, then Joshua. TCF BRP says, we can't let our cats out here in Arizona. They would be eaten by coyotes, bobcats, or javelinas. I've never heard of that. If you can leave a comment in the chat about what that is, that would be much appreciated. I don't know too much about that at all. Javelinas, okay. Nathan Gorman. Yeah, I don't know what to make of that. Right Hook Boxing says, fights like that well in advance. Even when Usyk beat AJ, he wouldn't fight him, but for that win. Yeah, some of that doesn't make sense to me when Fury made those comments about Alexander Usyk. But I would note, though, and I did talk about this in a recent Patreon video, those comments, they were obviously made at some point at the start of 2020, but they sort of surfaced again when it was some sort of, on Twitter, it ended up becoming, because I hadn't seen that before. But it came out in some sort of conversation where someone was saying something about Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury, and then someone responded and sort of said, well, here, have a look at this. Anthony Willis says, it will be interesting to see how Usyk handles Chisora bullying style. Methinks he is too fast to get tagged and will pepper Chisora with counter jabs and snap left hooks. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Because Derek Chisora, there's a couple of photos that were sort of posted in the past week or so. He is looking in very good shape. And if, I think for a fight against Alexander Usyk, he's going to need very good cardio. He's going to need to be in tip-top shape because Usyk will be trying to run rings around him and, be pot-shotting and all that sort of stuff, keeping him turning. It really is, up against Derek Chisora. Udosa says Ruiz is a wasted talent. Sort of yes and no. Obviously he took the opportunity when it was presented against Anthony Joshua, but I guess the yes part is, if he had have been more dedicated through his career, what could have happened? But then again, would he have got some of the opportunities like the Joshua fight if he had been, maybe a bit, more active, if he had have been in better shape? Maybe you would have had different wins and there would have been different circumstances in his career that it would have been like, no, we don't want to give that guy a fight because it's too dangerous. So Angus says, our friend, the serial Don Thumb guy, has slipped into the building, I see. Hit the like button. Serial Don Thumb guy. Not sure what that means. It's above prospect level. I don't reckon he'd be favourite against any of these top prospects. Are you talking about Nathan Gorman there? And I did see that Lucas Brown is calling for a Nathan Gorman fight, and I sort of thought, well, actually, after a Richard Lartey fight, Nathan Gorman versus Lucas Brown kind of makes a bit of sense. I sort of thought that's maybe at a level where it's not so dangerous, but obviously if Lucas Brown catches him with a couple of things, which is a possibility, I guess, but I would expect Nathan Gorman to win that fight. But it's more interesting to me than other fights that Lucas Brown has tried to ask for. I sort of think at a certain point that fight makes a lot of sense. Unga says Lartey wasn't mentally there at all, wasn't interested in fighting. Right Hook Boxing says Gorman and Lati just turned into a hugfest. Yeah, it wasn't great viewing. MMA chat says, shout out to everyone in the chat. Udosa says, Loma versus Lopez, who we reckon. Well, I'm really looking forward to that fight. There's sort of the potential passing of the torch fight. You got the young lion versus the old lion, and Lomachenko is pretty crafty. So and Lopez, is he fully proven yet? Is he sort of fully in his prime? I mean, it's probably a good time for Lomachenko to get him before, maybe it's one of these things because Lopez probably going up to 140 after this. But yeah, I'm loving that fight. So TCF BRP says the javelin is basically a wild desert hog. Okay, never heard of that. Unga says Loma for him. Udosa says Loma UD. Bill Billy says Gorman versus Kuzman would be okay. Similar size and level at the moment. Yeah, actually, I wouldn't mind that fight, but I guess they're on the wrong side of the promotional street. But I think both of them, actually, because Kuzman can box, but he needs someone to kind of be there in front of him. And Gorman, while he's not necessarily a mover as such, he can slip punches and be a bit sort of wily and a bit awkward. But I think that would be an interesting fight. So MMA Champ has got Loma by TKO. I already gave my Loma versus Teo prediction like 1,000 times, so I'm just giving you my prediction. David Mason says Usyk will school AJ and Varlin. We're going to fight. Well, there's a contract that was signed last year for Brown to fight. The start of it. I mean, this year feels so long. At the start of this year for Brown to fight Otto Varlin. But Varlin got it injured, had a foot fracture or something like that. So then there was a new opponent, which was Varlin's Dmitry Salita stablemate of Salita Promotions, Abdi Dovtaev. So then it was going to be Brown versus Dovtaev. So apparently there's still a contract there, and Showtime wants to make the fight for potentially later in this year. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if Brown really believes it's going to happen now. So he sort of just a few days ago listed about 9 or 10 guys that he'd like to fight. I mean, how realistic some of those are at the moment with COVID, travel restrictions, all sorts of stuff. But also, I mean, Lucas Brown has sort of become a little bit of irrelevant in the division right now. But he seemingly wants to get well paid for his services. So there's probably a diminishing market. So UK Rob Boxing says WBN saying the date hasn't expired and court. So this is sort of what I was going back to earlier. So at the start of the stream, if you weren't here at the beginning, so there was some news that sort of had come out with Mike Coppinger tweeting Fury that Fury would be fighting in the UK at the end of the year, that the contract with Wilder had apparently expired. And then in recent days, you've had some news that sort of emerged in the UK media saying the Wilder Fury 3 abandoned. Finkel, Wilder's co-manager, immediately comes out, shuts that down, says, no, we're still going ahead. We're going to be fighting. It's going to be December. Then Warren comes out and says, well, actually, nothing's in place. Contracts don't last forever. If it is going to happen, there's got to be a truckload of money, as he put it, with some guarantees. And all basically says December's not happening. And that potentially Tyson Fury could be fighting in the UK in December and then maybe on to fight Anthony Joshua next year. Which the question to me was, and this is why I posted earlier, and seemingly some of what UK Boxing Rob is sort of backing up there, is that, well, the Trilogy fight just doesn't go away. But, I mean, perhaps there's another angle here that they need some sort of something really big to help promote it for a third fight. And what could, help do that? Maybe some pretend bitter legal action. I don't know. That could make it interesting. But, yeah, I would have thought that given Top Rank owns the promotional rights to that fight for Fury Wilder 3, it's up to them to set the date. Deontay Wilder and his team, they've triggered the contract. Top Rank's the one that's been dragging this out for months. So I would have thought they can't just walk away from it. But, who knows? So just getting back to the chat here. Lost my place a little bit. MMA Champ says AJ KOs Usyk easily. AJ has superior inside game. David Mason says, and without the jab or the left hook. Tim says Nathan Gorman would beat Brown to bits, be like his Sean Turner fight he had, make him look very sharp. That for the Commonwealth would be a gift to Gorman. And maybe in his rebuild he needs something like that. But I do think that, yeah, he wins that fight. But out of all the fights that have sort of been suggested next, it probably makes the most sense. But at the end of the day, would the money be there that Brown would take it? Because I'm sure he wants to get paid. He's made no secret he wants to make as much money as possible. I don't know if Frank Warren's going to be putting up huge dollars. It sort of seems that Nathan Gorman's the sort of spare part at Queensbury. Since Joyce joined, Nathan Gorman dropped down on the depth chart. And yeah, sort of is a bit of a forgotten man to some extent. So Zaki says, Hatman Strikes Back and you are my favourite boxing YouTubers that I know. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that feedback. Yeah, Hatman's got a very good channel too. David Mason says, a lot of fans are fooled by AJ's muscles. He can't box. Liam Roskell says, not heavyweight, I know, but Tim Tszyu vs. Bowen Morgan announced the other day. Nice trans-Tasman clash. Well, I only actually sort of read that. I think it was yesterday or the day before. It sort of had passed me by, and I thought, actually, that's not, a bad matchup. I guess after his match like this, where it's more developmental fights, but I don't mind that. I think there will be some people, from overseas, maybe in different parts, or following Tim Tszyu's career, and they might go, Bowen Morgan, is this really the fight that he should have? But I don't mind it. Don't mind it at all. Zaki says Gorman versus Varlin would be nice. I think Nathan Gorman would lose that one. Gehi, I can't pronounce that name, apologies for that. Anyone ever hear how Denis Boytsov is doing? Roger says, will we ever see Jarrell Millet back in the ring? You can almost guarantee it. He'll do his penance and, sort of say that, there was some injustice, but I don't believe him. This whole thing, he's taken months to come up with his whole, peck of pills excuse that he's come up with. So he's more willing to say that he can't get it up than admit that he took something that he shouldn't have. So, he's yeah, I mean, maybe he figures that people would just be like, why would anyone say that unless it was true? But, I just can't believe him. Pretty limp excuse, I think, yeah. And then he was on some sanctimonious BS there was a message that he put up on his Instagram saying, and I do check it out, can't have it both ways and all this sort of different bits and pieces, and he knows firsthand. It's like, come on. The guy keeps playing the victim to some extent, and he's just done it to himself. The guy's just a flat out idiot. Yeah. It's sort of suppressing just some laughter here, just thinking about the whole situation. It just is ridiculous. Liam says McKean versus Brown is gaining a bit of traction again. Yeah, I saw that on Instagram. Lucas Brown sort of said now that he might be Australia bound if other things don't pan out, that he's open to it. So, I mean, maybe if that ends up being the biggest money out there for him, that he takes it. Will says, Zhang really intrigues me. Very interesting to think about where his ceiling is. His 21-0 record and age would suggest he's beyond prospect level, yet he's fought no one really. Well, that Rudenko fight was the first real step up that he'd had, and he looked good in it. So he's really, I think, been mismanaged by Rock Nation, but he's just sort of, they're now out of the business of boxing, so he's with Matchroom. But I sort of, 37 years old, it's hard to know how much he's really got left. I mean, he must be at the tail end of his prime at this point. I don't know. I mean, he's in a fight against Devin Vargas, and that doesn't really interest me. I mean, that's sort of at the same level of Rudenko. I think Rudenko's better than Vargas. I'd pick Rudenko to beat Vargas. So it's kind of a sort of much of a muchness. We already had that step up fight. Take that next step. Fight a guy who's in the top 30 or, somewhere there or thereabouts. So Bridges signed with Matchroom. Bridges versus Ball next. I did see that. Low budget. Who's looking forward to Joseph Parker in Junior Farr fight? Has had a decent sort of smattering of publicity here in New Zealand, but yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see the reaction. Ticket sales, they're thinking about 9,000 for there. pretty pricey sort of tickets, but yeah, there will be some interest. They'll be able to sort of build up a nice promotion, but it's not going to scale the same sort of heights, as Tua Cameron, even Ruiz Parker. I mean, that was wall to wall. Feels like it's something a bit different, a bit less. It's not a terrible fight or anything like that. I mean, circumstances have made that this one happens now, but yeah, I mean, there'll be some decent fights towards the end of the year. It seems to be from late October through to about the middle of December. Quite a few, good cards are sort of around the place. So Will says he wouldn't pick him over, this is Zhang, over top prospects. Zhang versus Gorman. Yeah, I think Zhili Zhang would take that one. Lubak says Zhang versus Price or Fury makes sense. Actually, Zhang versus either of those guys would be interesting. I think David Price is probably aiming a bit higher. He probably wants a bigger name, bigger money. He's sort of in that Lucas Brown camp where he's trying to maximize whatever time he's got in the sport. I think he's realistic where his level is, but he wants to, for the right price, he'll jump in against someone. So Udosa says Valine KO's Gorman. Valine is tough as nails. I think that one would go to a decision. Probably Otto Valine. Bigger guy with a bigger reach. I think he probably outpoints him. I think he's as skillful, if not more skillful, than Nathan Gorman. Gorman's 73-inch reach is really going to disadvantage him as he sort of continues up the levels here. David Mason says the heavyweight division is pathetically weak right now, and that's the reason AJ is champ. Jerry says rumors are Tyson Fury versus Oscar Rivas in December. Well, that'd be an interesting fight. Stable mates at Top Rank. There have been, just as we've been on air, there's been some news breaking that potentially Tyson Fury would be, looking back to the UK and having a fight in the United Kingdom potentially in December. But actually, UK Boxing Rob, who was in the chat, said there was some stuff around WBN, World Boxing News reporting, some stuff around, let's bring it up here. I'll just bring it up on my browser. It's taking forever. Tyson Fury attempts to move on from Deontay Wilder could get messy. So that is the headline. This is what I was sort of saying earlier on the stream. Let's just get down to wherever there's some... Okay, it doesn't seem to be any quotes here. Okay, so WBN was informed that by Wilder's co-manager Shelley Finkel that the legal agreement remained in place and the Americans still wanted to negotiate. Okay, well, sort of a bit of he said, she said going on at the moment. But all I can say is, it's not settled. It's, up in the air what's happening. You've got multiple different parties saying different things at this point. Apparently there's still a contract in place. We'll see where that goes. Scott70 says, Lucas Brown being linked as Fury's next opponent. Well, I hope not. I did see Lucas Brown saying he wants that fight, but I mean, no one else wants that. Literally, I mean, who wants to see that apart from Lucas Brown and Lucas Brown's family? That is an utter mismatch at this point. Probably end in a highlight reel knockout for Fury, though, that's for sure. So Tim says yes to Zhang vs Price, or if Dave Allen wins, Zhang vs Allen. Both fights, I wouldn't know who to be favourite. Well, I would pick Zhili Zhang to outbox Dave Allen. So Anthony says Dubois took the wind well and truly out of Gorman's sails. Yeah, well, he took it more than a year off and he didn't return in great shape. So hopefully he commits himself a bit more for his next fight. I mean, we know he was going to be blowing off a little bit of ring rust there. But he did say that, he could have taken a 6-rounder and, he wanted this big fight so he could get into titles. And I was like, well, we were saying Daniel Dubois versus Richard Lartey was a mismatch. So I think Larty had a bit more hype and profile than maybe he deserved based on his thin resume. But because to me, that wasn't a great matchup. There was some interesting sort of things about it, but it wasn't necessarily one where I sort of thought, well, this is a 50-50. So MMA Champ says he's going off on all you Fury nut huggers. Bill Billy says Parker vs. Farr is at least a closer fight than Tua vs. Cameron. Tua was so clearly levels above. I would pick Farr or Parker to take out Shane too. Yeah, I mean, that's a fair comment. But, you know, I think what helped build that fight was the bitter rivalry, the acrimonious build-up over years too. And, you know, they did a real good sales pitch. This one here just lacks a few of those elements. But also Shane Cameron had a pretty good profile in New Zealand before that fight was made. Whereas, you know, you could argue that Junior Farr, because his profile's been lower, he hasn't got really too many names in the resume, that hasn't helped build up this fight. But it's made now, so they're going to make the best of it. So Unger says he's just spoken to Mrs. Brown and she doesn't want to see it either. Yeah, Lucas Brown vs. Tyson Fury, no thank you. No thank you. Unger says Kevin Barry Jr. is a great Zumba instructor. Okay, I'll take your word for it. Will Stokes says Taylor Barry's just followed me on Instagram. Very nice to see. Had you followed him or something like that? Lubak says, so many fighters not lining up fights like Romanov, Bryan, just doing nothing. Well, Trevor Bryan, what is it? Closing in on 2.5 years of no fight. Manuel Char closing in on 3 years with no fight. And, you know, Char has just wrung every single drop of, you know, I'm the heavyweight champion of the world in the past 3 years. Yeah. So Right Hook Boxing says, Unger, what are you doing trying to show Mrs. Brown? That is the question. That is a good question. So I think we've pretty much wrapped up everything on my list. It's coming up 20 to 10 here in New Zealand. So I think I might wrap up. Any questions, final comments, drop them now. We'll wrap up in the next couple of minutes. But yeah, this whole Tyson Fury situation, yeah, I would definitely say it's going to get messy if this whole Wilder thing, you know, from what we're hearing, the contract is still in place from what Finkel's telling WBN, whereas Bob Arum is sort of saying, look, it could Fury could fight someone else in the UK in December. Fury himself telling Mike Coppinger that. So yeah, so I'm going to have a quick hunt around after that, may even do a quick video, but yeah. Any final comments here, drop them in the chat. So Anthony says, are you live commentating Farr versus Parker? No, I don't think I've ever commentated a fight live here on YouTube, because what I'm, you know, preparing for during the fight is because I'm taking notes round by round, you know, compiling my thoughts, writing notes for post-fight review, and then it's just literally as soon as the fight finishes, pretty much, or after the post-fight, hit record and then edit the video. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'd be looking to do, but Scott70 says Lucas Brown has a puncher's chance against Fury. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. So 78 in the building. So make sure to smash that like button on the way out of the door, please. That would be much appreciated. So wherever you are, morning, noon, or night, I do thank you for joining me here on another live stream. We'll be back again sometime soon. I've sort of had a few less live streams recently, been quite busy with work.